Now we come to our last album of the night, which is going to be our second time covering Fugazi. Our first time covering Fugazi in full-length album form, because before we did 13 songs, which technically is an EP. And so in the montage, you heard Turnover, and now you're going to hear a little bit of Merchandise.
We ain't nothing. You have no control. We ain't nothing. You have no control.
Okay, Fugazi, founded from the embers of
Let me give the
minor
numbers.
threat.
Let me
Oh
give
yeah,
the
Yep.
numbers
Go
real
for
quick.
it. Yep.
This is actually Fugazi's Repeater, number 100 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 8 in 1990, number 580 of all time. It is Fugazi's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Again, not making Rolling Stone's list, but Fugazi is ranked number 255 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
Okay, as I mentioned before, Fugazi, founded from the embers of a variety of different bands, including Minor Threat and then Discord. That is where Ian MacKaye, the guitarist and vocalist, came from. And we also have Guy Peugeot. I always want to say it the wrong way. I want to say it Guy, and it's actually Guy Peugeot. There we go. I finally got it right. And I know it. I just, for whatever reason, I want to say it the opposite way of where it is. He helped to form the band. And then you've got Joe Lally, who's the bassist, and you've got drummer Brandon Canty. Okay, so that's the original members. The first three members were actually MacKaye, Lally, and Canty. And then Picciotto came later to make the band from a trio to a four-piece after the first couple live shows of the band. There are 6 full albums, of which this is the first. There are 4 EPs, of which 13 songs, which we covered in season 3, was the first of the EPs. This band is most commonly referred to as post-hardcore, would be the genre this is considered, but often also put in the indie rock and American underground styles of rock as well. Each of the members of the band sort of came from other bands that are sort of well known. Canty came from Rites of Spring, that is sort of known as one of the early bands of the emo subgenre. Obviously, we talked about the effect that Minor Threat had in terms of hardcore, so that's coming from hardcore as well. So you're getting a mishmash of different styles that sort of form this total band. There are a lot of really fun facts about Fugazi. They're another band that it's a really interesting bio, Matt, along different than the KLF, but interesting in their own way. But let's get some of the basics out of the way. The name Fugazi comes from a compilation of short stories about Vietnam War veterans, in which there's an acronym, and Fugazi stands for fucked up, got ambushed, zipped in a body bag. So that is where Fugazi comes from. The band ran from the beginnings, as I mentioned before, in 1986 until they went on hiatus in 2003. And there still is a lot of controversy about whether or not Fugazi is an active band or not. And there's this hilarious chronology of since they've gone on hiatus, where they currently stand. They have not played together since then, but they went on hiatus after a 2002 United Kingdom tour. They played 3 straight sold-out nights, and they decided they want to spend more time with their families and pursue other projects, and so they took a hiatus in 2003. And immediately they began talking about a reunion, at which point it seems like for every festival, whether it be Coachella or Bonnaroo or everything, they're always rumored to be coming back, right? And they're another one of these bands, sort of like the Smiths, that's been offered an insane amount of money to reunite because they're one of the white whales of reuniting. And probably some of the arch capitalists would love the idea of throwing a lot of money to a band like Fugazi to get them to reunite. But in true Fugazi form, they have not taken the money. In fact, MacKaye says that they've been offered insane amounts of money to play reunions, but it's not going to be money that brings us back together. We would only play music together if we wanted to play music together, and time allowed it. So they haven't. But they've just consistently been rumored to be getting back together, but they have not. Fugazi is also known for the old punk DIY work ethic. While that was a part of what they were doing in other bands, especially in the Minor Threat era and the hardcore era, like Fugazi really took it to the next level. Their goal was to always have $5 tickets, but there were tours where they were not able to negotiate from venues and different people having tickets below the level of like $10 or $15. But their goal was always to charge $5. And as crazy as it sounds, every tour they ever ran has been profitable. And the reason they attribute it to is the band was popular, fans came out, and they had incredibly low overhead costs. So they were also really well known for picking the exact right venues to maximize the amount of money they made. And that sounds very capitalistic, but actually in this sense, it was kind of the opposite, because basically they had to make enough money to be functional, but they wanted to also do it in that high degree of difficulty way of doing it. So that was sort of like the Fugazi way of doing it. There's a ton of stories, many of which are funny, like about how they were able to sort of keep their methodology and how much money they left on the table. They had they used it like a set of ethics to determine their business decisions. So for an example, they sort of, in the modern era, they have that thing about basic living, right? Like stripped down living and stuff like that. So they would do things like, for example, they said that to sell merchandise on the tour would require someone who would be a full-time merchandise salesperson, who would require lodging, food, and other costs. So Fugazi decided to simply tour by not selling merchandise because they didn't feel like they could provide a living for someone that way. So if you ever see a Fugazi t-shirt, it is not from the band or approved. And you see them, right? But sort of the whole idea is if you see a Fugazi t-shirt, and there was a guy who was putting out like, this is not a Fugazi t-shirt, t-shirts for the band, but they were not endorsed.
So they never put out merch officially?
They did not officially put out merch.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good to know.
Yep. They also fought against slam dancing and fist fights, which they kind of thought that the movement had moved on from there. And there's a lot of clips you can find online of Mackay just sort of like calmly telling people, like, excuse me, would you stop that? And just like politely telling them basically knock it off. And the big thing they would do is if someone wouldn't do it and they had to kick them out, they would refund them $5 or whatever the cost of the ticket was, so that they could, so that they could view it as like ethically they did not cheat them, by kicking them out. It was basically, you need to leave, but we'll we'll compensate you so that you basically can't say, right, that it was not an experience where you're taken advantage of.
Right.
And so they said that some other people have said that part of it was there's a lot of liability to that, and because their overhead costs were low, it was a high degree of risk, right, to have that happen at their shows as well. Because even though they had the ethics, right, it would be easy for someone to turn around and kind of say, I got injured and stuff like that. So it's very difficult to detach Fugazi from their legacy in the various bands like Rites of Spring and Minor Threat they came from, the DIY punk. And also if you look at who Fugazi inspired both musically but also in spirit, it's a who's who of everybody, right? Like everybody you would want to have shouts them out, right? Like all the members of Rage Against the Machine, Joe Strummer, Joey Ramone, like Eddie Vedder, Kurt Cobain loved them. Everybody, right? Like everybody that you would want to be shouted out has said that they were inspirational to them. It's kind of a remarkable list of quotes about people who influenced them. In many ways, I think I'd say, guys, that Fugazi, even though they didn't rise to the heights of popularity, really functioned as the late 80s and 90s Clash, I'd say, is the role that they fit. And I think it came full circle because Joe Strummer basically said they were the purest form of the true punk ethos, shortly before he died.
They seem influential too in the way that like Velvet Underground was, like in terms of many bands came from Fugazi or the inspiration of Fugazi.
Yes, or at the very least, just like they're the sort of the purest form of being a band, right?
Yeah.
Because many bands talk about wanting to keep, the the authenticness to it and stuff like that, but it's really freaking hard to do that, right? And
Yeah.
you have to go like above and I almost feel like their credibility comes from the fact they're like, wow, there is a band that somehow did this. Like, it's amazing that they were able to do this, right? And I think people are a little bit in awe of what that was like. But anyway, that's a lot to talk about them. Let's talk about the music of Fugazi as well. And Josh, I think you get the first take on this one.
Well, I was very high on their first album we talked about last season, 13 songs. And
You have the EP.
Yep. And I'm very high on this album. There's something about this band that just strikes a chord with me and resonates with me. Maybe it's because they sound like all the other bands that I liked, that I listened to after them, that were inspired by them. There must be some common DNA in there. I definitely got the Rage Against the Machine vibes. This album sounds really good compared to the last one. I think the production has taken a step up. I looked and saw that this was produced at Inner Ear Studios in Arlington, Virginia, which I did not realize was like within walking distance of where I lived in Arlington at the time. And it's an influential
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think I walked past it and not know at the time, but that's remarkable. And anyway, so I think the production sounds good. I've always liked Ian MacKay's voice and their other singer as well. I like the fact that they have two different singers and they both kind of bring different energy, and they also interweave between songs in their singing. The rhythm section is really great on this album. They have really good bass lines, and they have a stripped down feel to them in a different way than the Breeders do. I don't know what it is. They just, whatever they use, it's like the ethics of the band comes through, and like the efficiency and of the music. They like whatever they use it sparingly, but to like the fullest effect. I don't know how to describe it, but it just, every bass line is really like distinct and remarkable. The guitars are really great. The singing of the energy, it all kind of comes together in a really good way that works for me. I find that they have a melody and kind of a appeal to them that other hardcore bands don't have for me, or the ones that we've listened to so far. At least they're not as like screamy. They're not as they're more you're able to pick out what they're saying better, and I feel like the music is just better in this band, and all of that adds up to me just really responding and getting on their wavelength, their energy level. I feel like I like the energy that their music brings and makes me feel, and it's kind of got this upbeat nature, and I do feel like amped up listening to them, but like it's kind of like tempered by what they're saying and kind of how the songs, I don't know, come together. It's very, in some ways they're very indefinable for me, but I really respond to them. So this is a big thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I think this is post-hardcore. I think I like the post part of this.
Like post-punk.
Yeah, I like post-punk, post-hardcore. This is great. This is really good. I didn't really know, any Fugazi. I know of them, but I didn't know any of their songs prior to the podcast here. And I guess I don't know. This is like I think I'm just a lot. I think the only thing that can be considered hardcore that we've covered that I was really turned off by was Black Flag, oddly enough, because they're kind of like the hardcore band. But like, I think this has just got so many different elements of things that I really like, and it flows really well together. It sounds great. There's lots of energy, and there's melody here too. Like there's definitely, like, I always associate with hardcore as like being devoid of melody. It's just energy, right? It's like this, and I know that this is like a subgenre. I don't know what constitutes the post and post hardcore, but sign me up for this. This sounds great. I love it's the Turnover's an excellent opening track. It's just that bass line and the drum part, the beginning of that is just a really cool sounding song. Repeater's an interesting song because I think ordinarily I would be just okay with it, but that little in the chorus where they do that little do 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 guitar part, it's like a small thing, but to me it just adds so much more to the song. It's just this really interesting part that they throw in there. Blueprint's a really like cool melody. It's like a darker kind of sounding thing that builds. Two Beats Off has a cool, acoustic guitar intro that's kind of, muted and muffled in the background, but they just do so many different interesting things, and Shut the Door is a crazy final track to the record. I don't know. It's clearly a disturbing picture that they're that he's painting there, but it's just the energy is just so it's like infectious, and it's hard not to like this. So I like this the more I listen to it. I oddly enough I didn't really differentiate too much between the vocalists.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have just thought that they were all kind of like the same person. But I don't know if I was focusing on more of the vocals as kind of an instrument, but also more just about the energy. I was focusing more on like on the instrumentation and whatnot. So yeah, I like this, and I don't think that there's really many hardcore stuff that I think I'm changing my tune on hardcore just in general. Like I'm not saying it's like my favorite genre or anything like that, but pretty much the bands that we've covered that have fallen in this lane have been ones overall that I've been pleasantly surprised by, like almost on a 100% consistent basis. And this is certainly up there as one of maybe maybe my favorite one of all of them so far that's kind of in the genre. So can definitely hear some of that stuff that they've influenced that you had mentioned, John. And there's certainly elements of the 90s aesthetic here too that you would hear later on in various, not just punk, but just also just indie rock and alt rock, kind of stuff that was happening. So yeah, really cool stuff. Really, really interesting band and great album. Thumbs up for me.
Sounds like you liked it more than the first album, Matt, because I don't remember you feeling as high on that.
Yeah, and I was trying to think, and I didn't go back to listen to it. But this one definitely, this one seemed in my mind to stick with me more than maybe the EP did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, post-hardcore, in case you're wondering, Matt, is a punk rock music genre that maintains the aggression and intensity of hardcore punk, but emphasizes a greater degree of creative expression. So in other words, how the lyrics are sung and different stuff like that. The people that were considered even slightly ahead of Fugazi doing this style of music were bands like Husker Du and the Minutemen. That was bands that were considered there.
Okay.
It then went into bands like Jawbox, Big Black, and Slint, who we talked about in an earlier thing, as well as the Dismemberment Plan. Okay, that was kind of how it carried into the 90s. And then it actually started to have mainstream chart success with some bands in the early 2000s, most famously At the Drive-In, AFI, My Chemical Romance are probably the three bands that, and most of them came from the hardcore scene. Not My Chemical Romance, but the other two did.
Yeah, I was going to say My Chemical Romance, it seems a little outlier there, but
they get pretty heavy at the earlier stuff, but definitely At the Drive-In and AFI are bands that absolutely you can see elements of this in for sure. So. Yep. So there you go. And I'm going to join you guys. This album kicks ass. And I go back once again. Why was I not listening to Fugazi all day? Like everything about this band like speaks to me in terms of my worldview, my taste in music, bands I was listening to along the way. I don't know if they were so good at staying under the radar that they stayed under my radar. I don't know if it's because they didn't have an initial hook when I was listening to this that I was able to. It's almost like a gateway drug. Get something that's a little bit more poppy, and then you're able to extrapolate out a little bit. And I just don't know if I didn't ever get to them, or when I got to them, I wasn't ready for them. But there's so many things in this. Some that you guys mentioned, like the really clean production for such a at times abrasive style. But like you said, Matt, there's melodies all over this. I liked 13 songs probably a little bit better than this. That's not to say I didn't like this album a whole lot. I think the reason I liked 13 songs was there was a little bit more of the frantic energy, the punk rock energy that I liked in it. And when combined with how tight it was and well produced, I think that was the special sauce for me on 13 songs. This seemed a little bit more, not, it's still very much in it, but it seemed a little bit more detached, right, from that true punk sound, hardcore sound. It was going more towards a mainstream indie rock song. It's funkier along the way. There's interesting drum parts on this. The dual vocals are a plus. I don't know how you can't tell them apart, Matt. Like, to me, they're very distinctive. Yes. Like, it's too clear. It's kind of like not they sound like this, but it's kind of like an Alice in Chains type thing where like there's two people and they have distinctive voice. They harmonize great, but they're very distinctive voices to me when they take the lead. So, and yeah, I there isn't a lot for me not to like about this music, and they don't overstay their welcome ever. Even when they tack 3 extra songs on, like they did on the extended version of this, which I listened to, the songs seem like they fit perfectly in the context of the album. And lyrically, unlike something like Minor Threat that was so skeletal in terms of the ideas, this is a more sophisticated adult way of writing lyrics. So there's growth as musicians as well. So just an easy thumbs up for me. For anybody, if you maybe listen to this and trying to figure out, like, kind of, I probably should have, like, is Fugazi for you? Like, by all means, if you listen to music in the 90s, or you listen to those bands we mentioned in the early 2000s that, you know, crossed over, and you may be familiar with My Chemical Romance, or maybe you listen to AFI in the 2000s and stuff like that. If you haven't already found these guys, like, this is a place you should immediately jump into. And as you said, Matt, when you combine this with Husker Du and the Minutemen and all these different groups, right, that we've covered from this genre, post-hardcore is starting to become a genre of choice for me. It doesn't surprise me that it is, and I don't think it would surprise you guys either that it's an easy lane for me, but boy, the breadth of bands that I like from this genre is pretty significant. So, yep, strong thumbs up for me.
There's like an emo nature to this as well. And I don't know where those
that's where Rites of Spring came from. You know, the band that preceded this, where multiple members of the band were in, right? Like, they were considered to be the forerunners of emo.
Yeah, emo is an offshoot of this, or an evolution.
So it goes hardcore, post-hardcore, emo. Is that the
well, I don't know if it's quite that linear. You know what I mean? Like, it kind of goes
a branch of the tree. More.
Yeah.
Because even within emo, there's different things. Like, there's emo, there's screamo. You know what I mean? And then there's, you know, then that evolved into very niche. Like, I'm looking right here, subgenres. There's something actually called Nintendo Core is something that's an actual genre. So.
There's got to be Dreamo, right? Like, you could put Dream Pop and emo together.
Nintendo Core, in case you're worrying, is taking emo and combining it with elements of video game music and hardcore punk.
What about
Josh? That's like the also known as the genre that Josh invented.
What about Memo, where you just write songs about memes?
Memo.
I did see something recently that there's a I forget what the name of the music is, but it's a modern music that's based entirely, like you said, Josh, on kind of like memes and like sad boy stuff. It's like a very Gen Y. They call it Gen Y grunge, kind of, and it's a very, but it has elements of like what hardcore punk were. It's kind of like you could see elements of like what the Descendants were trying to do and stuff, mixed with sort of this hardcore punk, and you know, but mixed with like making a very compact, modern style of, you know, keeping it under 3 minutes. But getting back to Fugazi, a real gem of a band.
They seem like, in retrospect, like a really foundational like band everyone should know, or like like 101 band if you're interested in like punk or hardcore or anything like that.
Well, they very much should have the story told. Like, they should be, like you said, Velvet Underground was a really good analogy, Josh, of kind of like a Stooges would be another, just bands that we just keep seeing, boy, these guys were influential. And there's other bands that as we've gone along, you're like, wow, that band just seems to have influenced everybody. Like, Television's another one that I feel like just keeps coming back up as people sound like them. And we could probably keep making that list, but go ahead and add Fugazi to that list as a band that just seems to have bits of their DNA in all kinds of stuff that comes later.
Yeah, definitely Also, like, I got Green Day like vibes, inspiration from them. It seems like with like the bass lines and things. They're not
For
afraid.
sure.
Also on this album, they're not afraid to go instrumental, which I thought was like Brendan number one is mostly instrumental, and Joe number one from the 3 song tacked on, that's also instrumental. It has a piano in it too, which is interesting. Yeah, so just some final thoughts there.
Thumbs up across the board.
Yep.
And that